Good afternoon and welcome back to my coverage of the 1834 unofficial World Championship match between Bourdonnais and McDonnell. The score is standing at 4-2 to Bourdonnais, and we also have Paul Morphy in 1859 doing some commentary. So will Bourdonnais be able to increase his lead even further, or will McDonnell fight back? Let's find out. We have d4 and d5, c4, so Queen's Gambit, and McDonnell accepts the gambit, e3, e5, and d captures e5. Morphy says, the move generally recognised as the best is bishop captures on c4. This capture of the king's pawn brings about an exchange of queens and greatly diminishes the interest of this game. So, as Morphy says, we have queen captures on d1 and then king captures. So, Bourdonnais has lost his castling powers. We have knight to c6, this knight, and f4, pushing on the king's side. Bishop to e6, this bishop. And bishop to d2, bishop to c5, knight to f3, and h6, knight to c3, rook to d8. He's now pinning this bishop. King to e1, unpinning. Knight on g to e7, rook to c1, bishop to b4. The knight moves out of the way to b5. It's attacking this pawn here, which is undefended, which would also come with check. So McDonnell captures the bishop on d2 with check. Bourdonnais has to capture back with the knight, and now McDonnell pushes his rook to d7 to defend the c-pawn. But unfortunately, there's only one defender on this pawn against Bourdonnais' two attackers here. So Bourdonnais captures the pawn with his bishop. The bishop captures back, and then the bishop is captured not with the knight but with the rook. And as we said, Bourdonnais is now up a pawn, even though they're doubled here. He's winning at this point. So McDonnell goes ahead and castles, and the knight comes back to f3. We have rook on f to d8, doubling up along the open file, and Bourdonnais moves his king out of the way to let his rook out and into the game. And we have knight to d5, knight on b to d4. And Morphy says, this was probably hastily played, and with the proper reply on the part of black should have equalised the game. Curiously enough, black overlooks the opportunity afforded by his adversary's last move. He ought now to have proceeded as follows. Knight captures on f4, so winning a pawn back. E captures f4, knight captures on d4, knight captures on d4, and rook captures on d4. And the game is quite even, Morphy says. And if you count the pawns, we have 6 for black, 6 for white, and they also have 2 rooks each. So yeah, it's even material and even position. We expect this to be a draw. But McDonnell didn't take the chance to equalise the pawns by capturing on f4. Instead, he captured the knight on d4, and the rook captures back, and the game continues with c5. The rook doesn't want to be captured, so he moves back to d2, and we have knight to b4. a3, trying to push away the knight here. But instead, we have rook captures on d2, knight captures on d2, and knight goes back to c6. Knight to c4, b6, and rook finally comes out to d1, but McDonnell immediately goes for the exchange, so the king captures back on d1, and McDonnell starts trying to get his king into the game, as does Bourdonnais, king to e2, and we have king to e7, king to e7, king to d3, king to e6, and king to e4. So both kings coming to the center of the board. And we continue with knight to e7, g4, g6, a4, f5 check, and Bourdonnais deals with this by capturing en passant, and McDonnell captures back with his king. Bourdonnais brings his knight to e5, and McDonnell brings his king to e6. And he probably thinks this is protected, but Bourdonnais goes for it anyway. And now, instead of capturing back, McDonnell retreats his knight to c8. Why does he do this? Well, Morphy has an answer. He says, "The game being past redemption, it is quite immaterial which move black selects in this position. If he now captures knight with knight, white of course wins easily by f5 check, etc." So of course this checks the king, forks the knight, the king has to move somewhere, and the knight will be captured here. And because white is in a centralized position, once black captures this back, he's going to push the king up and start pushing the pawn up the middle, and black won't be able to stop it. So that is why McDonnell retreated knight to c8. So we continue with f5 with check, and the king moves to d6. And we have h4 continuing to push all the pawns, and king to c7, king to e5, knight to d6, f6, a6, king to e6. This is getting dangerously close to promoting. We have b5, captures and captures, and f7. And McDonnell resigns himself here to capturing the pawn, which gives up the knight. And so Bourdonnais is, of course, in a very winning position here. We have king to d6, trying to make something with his remaining two pawns here. Knight to f4. McDonnell pushes to c4, trying to make something out of his two pawns. Bourdonnais pushes g5, and we have captures, captures, and b4, and Bourdonnais plays knight to e2. And at this point, McDonnell realizes it's all over, because he won't be able to stop this pawn, and these two pawns are going to be captured very shortly. So he realizes this, and he resigns the game. So congratulations to Bourdonnais. He goes up to 5 games to 2, building an appreciable lead now. And Morphy has one final comment. He says, "This is one of the few contests occurring between these players which present but few points of interest. It affords scarcely any opportunity for variations or comments." Well, I enjoy Morphy's mean comments, but I did enjoy this game more than it seemed that Morphy did. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you again next time for Game 11.